Hello and welcome to how to find and win a grant for your business or community project. Before we begin, my question is, what would you do with a share of somewhere between 50 and 80 billion dollars? Yes, that's the estimate of grant opportunities there are in Australia at the moment, somewhere, depending on where you look, between 50 and 80 billion dollars worth of funding. If you had access to this funding, where would you start? Interesting question. How would you feel? Before we start, let me just talk about myself, just quickly, get it over with. Uh, I have 30 years experience in the funding area. I started by putting nearly 30, then realised that I actually do have 30 years experience. I started back in, just do the calculations, and I worked at somewhere where we promoted the European Union, and I had this brainwave of doing a workshop called EU Funding for Beginners. And I remember the first time we ran that program, it was a cold December day, because this was in the UK, and we had 7 participants. And that workshop quickly became the bread and butter, the cash cow, and we were running that course for many years after that. So there's always interest on where to get funding. At the end of, soon, probably about 9-10 years later, I found myself working in an organisation where I had to set up a training fund with the grants, where people could apply for grants underneath it. And myself and the executive officer literally had 6 weeks to turn around a whole structure, a whole framework for grants. And she was looking after the policy side, and I developed the framework itself, and we did it. And by the time I left, we had 50 different projects underneath that training fund. I've been involved in all aspects of funding, from designing the program guidelines and selection criteria to applying for funding for clients. Even in Australia, I found myself working for a few years in a government funding body. So when I sort of stepped out into 2010 and I started working with community and businesses, one of the roles I stepped into was grant writing. So yeah, this is me. So what I'm doing today is giving you lots of advice on guidance and tips based on my experience. Again, people say a client will come to me, potential, and say to me, okay, have you got experience of this funder? And I'm going, well, there's so many funders out there, but if you're talking about, have you got experience of, these are examples of some of the grants that I've been successful with: environment, arts, business, capital works, training, partnerships. Doesn't matter. I'm going to show you during this presentation that there is actually a basic structure that works across all grants. Most, I would say all grants. And once you learn this, it's the technical information that derives, whether sport or arts, etc. Because you can be a jack of all trades, so you work on the technical expertise of the client, but the actual framework of the grant itself is very, very much on similar lines. And I've been successful. $1,500, they were festival grants, right up to $1 million plus. Usual range, 20 to 50,000, 100,000, 150. Certainly got a full range of experience in the grants area. So this is for you if you've heard of grants and want to learn more about them, or you're interested in a grant for your business or your community project, or you want to know where to look, and you want to increase your chances of getting that grant. Now you can see I've got a couple of dice there, because it's not just about rolling the dice and seeing who comes up trumps. It is about, there is things that you can do that's going to improve your chances. So let's increase those odds now. So today we're going to cover what is a grant, where to start looking for a grant, 7 tips to help you to get funded, and a special bonus at the end for listening to the presentation. So let's start with what is a grant. And I put this first and foremost because it's not free money. It's not aid, it's not a donation. There are strings attached. It is actually a purpose. It's given to you, the funding is given to you. You do not have to give it back, you have to use it, unless of course you do something wrong and then you do have to give it back. But it's about it's about change. It's project activity. It's about change. It could be business change. It could be environmental change. It could be change in the community. But there has to be a process that leads to a result. And it's driven by somebody else's policy or beneficial legacy. Now, I'm putting that first and foremost because when I work with clients, because I do critique applications for people, and they're not used to writing an application on their own, and I have a look, and it's their first time or second time, and it's all about what they want to do. So my first thing I do is I refer them back to what is it that the funder wants to achieve by giving out this funding. So we'll cover that in the next slide. Grant funding is competitive, and there's no guarantee of success in your application. It's not guaranteed. I've been looking at figures. It could be anywhere between 40 to 60 plus % on average on a good day. So I'm going back to what I was saying about let's be clear from the start. It's not all about you. Ultimately, whatever you want to do is providing a solution or a grassroots contribution to achieving an outcome at somebody else's level. And this is determined by how you propose your project and how you propose to carry it out to achieve their outcomes. So when you look at the guidelines, and every grant has guidelines, there'll be some clues in there that will tell you what they're looking for, what it is that they want to see changed. And in the next couple of slides, I've got a business example and I've got a community example. One of them is actually open now, and the second one is actually going to open in the next few days. But I just wanted to show you just an example of what you might look for. But the key is that you are responding to them, not this is what you want to do, please pay us. So this is the City of Melbourne Small Business Grants. Now I've picked this out because some councils, not many, but some councils actually have grants available for businesses. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in a later slide. But in this one, the City of Melbourne Small Business Grants, they go by helping passionate, innovative small businesses realise their dreams and reach new markets. Sounds fantastic, doesn't it? Then it goes on to say, well, there's a clue there to start with, new markets. The programme provides financial assistance to support market-ready products. So what you have to have is a market-ready product or service that will enhance the City of Melbourne's reputation for innovation and creativity and contribute to a thriving, sustainable business culture. So when you're putting your argument for funding forward, you are, and this is the first thing that you would need to look through the guidelines. This is just an example, but I would say you will be looking at how your product or service is going to enhance the reputation of the City of Melbourne, for its innovation and creativity, and how it's going to contribute to a thriving, sustainable business culture. You see the twist? So, and the other thing you could do, if especially if it's a local council, and we'll come to that, is look through their council plan because you need to be speaking their language as well and get into their minds about why they're doing this. The second example I've picked out because this is a multicultural one. It's Multicultural New South Wales. It's a grant that's likely to open shortly. And it's talking about festivals and events that brings communities together, showcases the benefits of cultural diversity, and promotes social cohesion and community harmony. Now, I've brought this in as an example because I do write grants applications for and work with clients who want to develop festivals. This is an example of Holly Festival, and they you could hold a festival just for your community. But what they're saying there is the purpose of a festival is to bring communities together. So in your application, you're actually talking about not just, it could be just the Indian community or the Jewish community or whatever. It's all about bringing the community, the whole of the community together. The purpose there is to create community harmony and to showcase cultural diversity. So when you're writing for an application, this application for a festivals grant, for example, it's not just, oh, we want to do this and we want to do this, this, and this. You've got to bring it back to why. And the why is because you want to use it to create some harmony in the community. And especially if there's been some recent incidents, then you can bring that into it. So it strengthens your application. So again, as I said, you could just apply for a festival for the sake of a festival, or you bring it back to what the funder is trying to achieve. That's what I'm trying to get to you. So you'll find that in every grant that you do, it's not just about you. It's more to do with, well, why are they putting this money out there in the first place? Once you get that in your head, then you're writing your application to a different audience. So, project ideas. What do you have out there? We have had an examples here. We've had youth, we've had aged care, we've had training. There's a whole range of things that you can actually apply for a grant for. And we'll go through some of these ideas. So, where do you start looking? The very first place I suggest you look is your local council. And I've just been reading a report by ourcommunity.com that actually gives some interesting figures here. And 60% of applications to local councils are more likely to get funded. So they're not large grants, but if you're a small organization, most of the time it's community focused, environment, events, capacity building, arts, community cohesion. Sometimes, like for instance, the example with the City of Melbourne, some local councils will fund something for business because it's in their priorities to stimulate business growth in their locality. So I would say before you look anywhere, I would look online, I would look up your local council, and I would see what they fund. And you probably find in some cases they're funding your grants on multiple times a year. So you've got the opportunity to go back and look through, and we'll come up in a future slide, some of the documentation that's going to help you put together your application based on what they've done in the past. So I would say before you do anything, have a look to see if your local council can support what you're doing. Obviously, if you're looking for big amounts of money, You go into a different level, and it's not likely to be the councils, but I do know. I mean, I know one that's just done $50,000 a year for 3 years for successful applicants. So that's 150. But most of the time, they tend to keep them in a level of small control. So I would be saying to you, make friends with your local council, economic or community development teams. Okay, so the next level to be looking at is state governments. And the other thing about this is the reason why I'm using local, state, and the federal government first is because they don't have the same restrictions that philanthropics do. I'll explain that as I go along. You're either a business or a not-for-profit, basically, at these levels. So a state government, every state has a website that filters the grants that's available for people and businesses and communities in those states. So I would be looking up your local state and start looking to see what kind of grants are available. And you'll at the moment, if you're a business, it seems like the best place to be is Queensland. And there's lots of opportunities, or seems to be coming through, for businesses in Queensland. Community, though, is Australia-wide. We have a guide called Where to Find Grants in Australia, and you can find that on getthatgrant.com. It's free to download, and it's got the web links for every state in Australia and some more besides. Likewise, the federal government, they've got their own grants level as well, and those two links, which are on top of the slide, are the main links to get into the databases for the federal government grants. So there's the business.gov.au and there's a communitygrants.gov.au, and they will give you or open up opportunities again. State government, federal government, they could have large grants, so it becomes more competitive. But having looked at that, looking at this report, still they're still more achievable, I would say, than perhaps some of the philanthropics. So, if you've got a theme, an area to look at, then have a look at the federal grants. And then I just mentioned this, there's the philanthropic grants. Now, philanthropic is someone giving or charitable, or someone who likes to do good for others. And that's the premise from where the philanthropics are coming. Very charitable, and therefore most of them tend to have extra requirements. So not only do you have to be a not-for-profit, you would have to have deductible gift recipient status, which is a tax office endorsement, which means anybody who gives contributions will get some tax offsets. How that works, I'm not the expert. And then this tax concession charity. So by being a charity, again, there are tax concessions there, income tax, etc. So philanthropic grants are good if you are a charity or a charity that's working with the most vulnerable. They're not as easy to find, but there is a way to find them. Before I carry on, before I go into are you eligible, if you've got a pen and paper and you are looking across the board, I've given you the states. I used to be able to give you a link for the charitables, but that particular source has removed that page, so I can't do that anymore. But you might want to look at Grant Guru, Grant, G-U-R-U. They're a resource that I provide free access to look up what grants are available in Australia. You have to register. But as I said, they're there and they're available. Otherwise, if you're looking for grants on a regular basis, you could subscribe to some mailing lists that are out there. There are businesses, organisations that do provide that service. I sort of register for one of those services simply because I've got a client base. I work with the grants, and I really haven't got the time to be looking. I'd rather have that source available and then pick up the ones which I think are relevant to my clients. So I do pay for the paid service, but I said there are free services out there as well. So, okay, so if you're looking around, the first thing you would do if you see a grant is look at, are you eligible? Now, grants are available to individuals, and they not many, but they could be for arts, or they could be for fellowships. There may be a requirement that it's not for profits. And again, it could be not for profits across the board, which is what state, federal, and local government would work with. A sports clubs are not for profit. Some community groups are not for profits. So arts organisations can be not for profits. So there's a whole range of not for profits. But then there's those that dig deep into becoming a tax concession charity or a deductible gift recipient status, and they're the ones where you find in the philanthropic area. There are grants there for businesses. There are grants there for just for councils, for example, or peak bodies, or maybe it's a restricted list. And an example there is the federal government, who may have given out some funding in the previous year. There's more funding become available, but rather than make it available to everybody, we'll go back to those first people and say, hey, do you want some more? And apply for this pot of funding. It's restricted. So there are ways to look. Now, what if you have a good service, but you're not eligible? But you could work with somebody who is eligible. And what I mean by that is that you could be, let's have a look, a, a, a business consultant. You could be a marketer, a marketing expert. You could be a Keep Fit instructor. I was talking to one of those a couple of months ago. And you've got something that you could offer. So, and you have to think about who your client base is. So if you're a sort of Keep Fit or jiu-jitsu or something like that, I'm just using it as an example, and you want to work with women who've suffer from domestic violence, etc., or young people who have got issues, disengaged, or anger management, etc., then you might contact a not-for-profit and say, hey, how about we work together? You can get the grant and then contract in my services. So there is ways, especially when it comes to, say, things like capacity building. In the not-for-profit space, they need expertise. They may be able to apply for a grant and then bring in a consultant who will help them to build their capability. So I'm saying to you is you may not be eligible directly, but if you think outside the box, there might be a way that you could actually work with somebody who is. So, as I said, if you're not eligible, can you work with someone who is? The fourth area, or the next area I'm looking at here, is what I call sector-specific grants. Now, sector-specific grants, and these are examples, is where if you're in the arts area, all you're interested maybe is your state arts. There'll be a department, government department. It could be a federal, and it could other agencies. So, for instance, in the arts, it's Creative Victoria, at the state level, Australian Council for the Arts at the federal level, and they both work within the different jurisdictions, but they complement each other. And you have things like commercial radio stations. There is a grants category specifically for them, so you'd be looking there. Land care, Coast Guard, recreational fishing, even. There are specific grants out there, and if you find out if somebody is looking after or dedicated for them, training is another one, dedicated to looking after them, then I would be focusing on those grant providers. Okay, so let's have a look at, move on now. And so you're hooked. You've hooked the potential. What next? Do you like that pun? Fishing, potential, hook. Um, Download the guidelines is the first thing you do. When you find something, download the guidelines. The first thing you should do, no matter what, is look to see if you're eligible or work with somebody who is. Because, and it was in another report put forward through our community a couple of years ago that showed that, about 40 to 50% of applications were abandoned because they realised they'd started working on them, people started working on them and then realised that they were ineligible. So imagine all that time and effort that's been wasted. So first thing you do is download the guidelines and check to see if you're eligible to apply. And then the next thing you want to do is to check to see what you want to spend the money on is eligible as well. I'm working with a few organisations that are looking for capital funding to build or fit outs or to build a new building facility. And you receive some really likely grants, and then we have a look at the eligibility for expenditure, and you'll say we do not fund capital works. So, forget it. There's no point in trying to make that square peg fit the round hole. So you do not pass go. Basically, that's the message. This is the Monopoly board. Are you eligible? Check out first. It is what you want to spend. Eligible. If you can't and it doesn't work, you just don't pass go. Full stop. Next thing you do is go access the application form. There may be a sample of the application form on the funder's website, or if it's Smarter Grants, you may have to go in and click each page as you go along. And you'll find that it's the administrative area at the top, criteria questions in the middle, budget questions towards the back. But yeah, check out those questions. And the other thing you need is to see what the attachments are that's required. So if you need quotes, if you need to have your 3 years worth of financials, all the documentation that you're going to need to be able to submit your application, because you can't submit your application if you don't have that paperwork. So I said the application form is very important because it's going to give you the criteria questions that you're going to be responding to. You check out previously funded projects. Many a time, the funder will put on their website details of organisations, probably what the project title was called, maybe where it was, and if you're lucky, they'll even put how much it was funded for. It gives you a great idea of what they're looking for and the ballpark figure of what to apply for. So if that's available to you, then I'd be looking at it. There's the frequently asked questions, FAQs. And basically what happens here is that there is this notion of probity. So if somebody rings the funder and asks a question and it's a really good question and with the answer, rather than that just resting there with that one conversation, that question and answer will be translated onto a list. It will be transferred onto a list. That's called the frequently asked questions, and that list will be updated on a regular basis. So if you go into that form at the beginning of the application process, there might be 10 questions and answers, which is what the funder thinks that people want to know. And then You go in a few weeks later, that might be, about five or 6 pages longer, because people have already asked questions and the answers are being given, and that information has been shared on the frequently asked questions. So it's important, because there might be some of those curly questions you never even thought about. If there's a possibility, attend a briefing or a webinar or an online webinar. You will get the standard PowerPoint presentation, because it's really about just giving out the information that's needed to be given. But it's useful, because you get to see the funders, the people behind those guidelines, and you've got a better idea of who they are, and a sense of what they're looking for. Get on their newsletter list. I mean, I mentioned arts, if you're in a specific sector, for example, and you know that you're going to want to apply for grants in the future, get on the newsletter list. Simply because the minute that the grant is open, it will go on their newsletter and you'll be the first to know. And it gives you more time then to prepare your application. And of course, contact the funder. There will be a contact and a contact number. And if you've got any questions, it's worthwhile contacting them. Guidelines are not perfect. They are written by human beings, and sometimes the guidelines do look confusing. And it's good then just to ring up and just get clarification. Okay, so are you ready to apply? Here are 7 tips for writing an application that stands a chance of getting funded. Remember, roll the dice, but let's increase the chances. Okay, remember what I said earlier? It's about the objective, the reason why the funder is putting the money out there in the first place. Think about it from that perspective, how you're contributing to the change and how you're contributing to a policy direction. There might not be a policy mention, it might just talk about outcomes, but you've got a clue there as to what they're looking for. So I would do that. I say, and as mentioned earlier, when I critique, I will go back to the person. I'll say, okay, but what about this? Why don't you, in relation to what is the funder saying here about blah, blah, what are you doing? So you can start by writing what you want to write, but then thinking about, well, how am I going to argue this back to the funder so that I stand out ahead of everybody else? Show them the evidence of the need for your project. Even if you know your funders pretty well, you should never, never, never assume that your application is just going to be funded because they know the demographic that you're working with. That's not how it works. You have got to be able to describe. You've got to be able to tell the story, and you've got to show that you understand the problem. You have to show the evidence of the need for your projects. Going back a few years, when I was working in the funding body, somebody was coming to me with an idea, and I was going, why? What's the need? And she said, blah, and it was like peeling an onion, and we did it again. I kept just coming back at her. And in the end, she got it. She said to me, "Oh, it's because 56 blah blah." And she said, "Right." She got to that point. I said, "Right, okay. So that's what you need to put down. So peel the onion and get right down to the data. Show them you understand the problem. Now, in my hand here, the identification of need. I talked about external data. The easiest way you can find data is through Profile ID. And basically what you do there is you go onto the internet and you put in the search engine ID, as in identity, space, and then the name of the locality or the area that you're looking at. So it could be ID Shepperton, it could be ID Blacktown, it could be a large area, small area. Just try it, and basically it will bring up this really good resource which has got the excuse me, sorry. Apologies, I had to cough, so I had to get some water. Um, yes, so I'm saying it's got some really good resource that comes up if you Google ID space the locality. You will get on the front page the ABS data at the very least, organized into headings, etc., so you can really scrutinize it. Behind that is what's called the social atlas, and your area is broken up into neighborhoods, and you could have a search criteria, and it'll have percentages. For example, you could have disengaged young people. There is one there. And you can see within a street even where there are higher concentrations of disengaged young people, disengaged from education and employment. So, and then it's great because when you're actually putting together your application, you can quite safely say that your unemployment rate is 15% in this area, and in some neighbourhoods it is as high as 30-45%, because you have put your mouse over a certain area, and that's what data tells you. Even though the numbers are not high, it gives you percentages that makes it look as if there is actually a real issue. Well, there is. What I'm saying is it gives you that evidence. Um, the next, they also have a projection of population into the future, and there's also an economic profile. So I would say, look, use that and use the data, use numbers when you're telling the story. And the story should also have that story element to it as well, because we human beings like to read the story. And it sort of, the figures are great and they have to be there, but it adds a good balance to it. So you would actually bring that into it. Now, the second level there is government policy and local councils. And I would say to you, wherever you run a project in Australia, you're going to run it on some council territory. So I would be looking at the council plans for 2017 to 2021. And if there's any linkage with what you're doing, you could actually build that in and get letters of support from council if you could. But you're actually creating and helping and building your case because of a background document that the council's already done its research. So why not use that information to help you to put together the argument for your project? There's research, any research that's been done. The another source, if you really, especially if you're applying for large amounts of funding, is to put data.gov.au or data. Whatever the state is, .gov.au. So data.vic.gov.au, data.nsw.gov.au, and that's going to bring up the databases or links to the databases that the state and the federal government have made available. So there's no excuse on this earth why you should not have access to data, because these governments have made it possible. Your internal data, attendance rates, tourism nights, anything that you've done, had that feedback from consultation. They love that consultation because it's showing that connection with your customer base or your community base. And the evaluation that you might have done in the past. And that's great if you're moving on to the next project, because you can say, we did this project, it's fantastic, but the feedback has said that we need to do this, and therefore we're applying to do this. And you've got the evidence of the feedback, so use it. Stakeholder feedback, working, if you want something that's got community input, then show the community input. Use some examples that community partners have come up with. Just show them the evidence of the need for your project. I was working on a project a few years ago, and we didn't think we had enough information, so we just thought of everything to do with the need. I think it's things like tenancy reports, everything. That application was very rare because it didn't just get funded, it actually got more than we'd applied for. And based that, and they got a good letter saying that the reason why they were so happy with that application was because we managed to show them the evidence and the capability to deliver that project. So it's very important that you think about everything to do with the need and throw it in there. And you may be surprised. Okay, so show them how you will manage the project. And because this is about risk to them as well. So you break it down into timelines, and I do this. You say, look, in this period, we're going to do this, and then in brackets, July to September, and then blah, 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 and then whatever, September to November. So you're showing them stage by stage by stage. You may even say that you're going to engage a project manager with these skills and a project team with our skills. You're going to have somebody overlooking the whole thing, but you're showing them that you're going to make sure that this project is going to come in when you said it will, within the budget and to the specification and quality that they would expect from you. So that you would do that with anything, and this is the same with a grant. Get real about the budget. When I do workshops for councils in particular, I'm surprised at the number of times that I get asked to do a little bit of a focus on the budget, and so because I mentor students, mentor people, and I have realised that the budget, what I think is common sense, and I don't mean that in a detrimental way, but what I think is common sense, people are just don't know, they don't understand. So this is some hints about how you would get real about putting your budget together. So because budgets tell the story and they match the expenditure to the project plan. So if you put something in your expenditure that doesn't actually got mentioned in the plan at all, you sort of, okay, because sometimes people might go to town basically, and they want this, then they start putting all the equipment in and stuff like that, and stuff that seems a little bit excessive. So you've got to actually match what you're going to spend with what somebody would think is needed in the project itself. I've had experiences where we said this was ineligible, and they were very, very careful. An example, the applicant was very, very careful in the application not to mention what was not eligible. And then in the budget, they gave it away. They said it. They actually said that ineligible element came up. So, it just happens. It's not because it's project based. It's not for ongoing expenses. The funding is beginning and ending. So if you've got salaries involved, it's project staff basically. It's that level that they would not get paid in their everyday roles if it was somebody who was doing some extra work. It's not for ongoing expenses. If you've got overheads, work it out as a proportion of the whole thing, not to cover the whole thing. This is some examples. Income, this is the one that councils get us on. Income must equal expenditure. Now, you might have a question box that will say somewhere up, how much you're applying for from this grant, and you write it there. And sometimes it's just above the budget, so you just think, oh, okay. So when it comes to the income, you forget to put that in. And so in the income line, you've probably got every other income, but not the actual amount that you want to apply for. So that's not going to balance with the actual expenditure. So make sure in the income, you always add what you want from the funder, even though you might have put it somewhere else. You would be looking for and in some cases, the philanthropics, for example, they want to reduce their exposure to risk. So if you have got funding coming in from other sources, put it in. You would expect to see maybe a contribution from your own organisation. I've written grants where it's just been totally straight out a grant. There's been no contribution, and that's fine. If you know those funders, that's great. You just get granted. But others do like to, I say, share the love. And in fact, you might have a question, is this, are you applying to somebody else for this grant? And rather than thinking, oh, they're trying to catch me out here, actually what they're trying to find out is there a possibility that they can just part fund it, and that, you know, somebody else is going to look at it. I mean, sometimes you can end up applying and getting, you know, getting it twice. But you know, most of the time they're asking you because they want to see that there's other contributors. So in your income, there'll be income from the grant source, there may be income from your own organisation, there may be income from partners, there may be income from other grants, and there's also this thing called in kind. Now, in kind is notional, and what I mean by that is you've got volunteers. So you're running a festival, for example, and you've got volunteers. Now, they're not part of the main costs, but if you just sort of like ask for income and expenditure of the cost, you're not really given a good indicator of actually how much it really has cost. Had it, you know, if you'd have done this professionally, not that you don't, but I mean, if you'd brought in people and paid them, it would have cost a hell of a lot more. So you need to show that. So if you've got volunteers actually doing a lot of the planning and then doing all that work up to the actual event and being there on the day, then cost them in as if you were going to pay them, but you're not. That's why it's called in kind. So, but if you put them in the incomes area, it's going to really, really increase the value of your project, which is great news, because it shows how that you are committed to this project, that you're going to make it work. You're not just going to take the money and run and do it half-heartedly, because you've got contribution in there as well. The community has got a contribution if you work in the community space, which is fantastic. But likewise, you've got to also balance it out in the expenditure area by just putting the same figure in as expenditure, maybe how it's been like volunteers for events, blah, blah, and then in brackets in kind. So the funder can see that you've balanced the book. It may be it's a big project and you're asking for part funding, and I've seen it where the funder has said, please indicate in the expenses which bits you want us to pay for. But at the end of the day, your income must equal your expenditure. You may be, and as I said, you can source part of your funding from elsewhere. It's okay. And we talked about in-kind match funding. There's cash match funding, which is a contribution from your own organisation, and there's in-kind. In-kind can also be the venue. If that venue is going to be used, it's been donated for the event or for whatever purpose, and if it was going to be used commercially, it's going to have that value on it, so show it. It doesn't matter, as long as you balance it out on the other side of the budget, it's not going to make any difference to what you're asking for. It's just going to show that there's a contribution in kind for the venue. The fifth tip here is to show them you've got the capability to manage the project and their money and any other risks you can think of. A couple of slides ago, I just mentioned about the application that we got 60%, that's the value, 60% more than we applied for. And it was quite a substantial amount. And as I said, there were two reasons. One's because of the way that we demonstrated the need, and the second was showing them that it was a partnership, and it was showing them that the partners had the capacity between them, the capability to manage the project, how they were going to do it, and there was a bit of risk management as well, but it was that capability that impressed the funder. So it's important that you think about how we're going to manage this to make sure If you're in a not-for-profit organisation, I certainly have a link up to your committee level, because the contract is at that level, and therefore they should be monitoring the contract. You would have, technical staff, project-specific staff. You may have a steering group. You may have a reference group. There's certain things that you can do. Now, I go into more detail like that when I actually do. I've got a project management training program which goes into that information in more depth, like terms of reference for groups and how they're set up, etc. Even partnerships. So I'm not asking you to go into that depth. I'm saying to you, just think about how you're going to structure, how you're going to make sure that you're managing the project properly. We don't want to be Humpty Dumpty, fall off the wall, and not get back up again, because it doesn't do well for the future. So how will you know you've made a difference? That's the sixth one here. And again, these will be in the questions. How are you going to measure the change? Remember, these projects are about change. Changes to your business, changes to the way that you do your business, changes to the community, changes to the environment, or whatever you're doing. So how will you measure change? And therefore you have to think about, well, how do we measure it at the beginning? How do we get that benchmark information? We'll tell them, we might be changing to attitudes and behaviours, or we might be looking at how well we did, or what difference it made to people. If people were doing this keep fit sort of businesses working with not-for-profit to do some work with young people, you might need to know, well, what difference has that made? Not that they're going to go and cause any damage or anything, but I mean, it could be, how it might have helped them to become more rounded individuals, or more control of themselves, because it's not about violence at all, and how they managed to created more control. So and then you're thinking, well, how do we measure that at the beginning, and how do you measure that at the end? I say to you that there's nothing that cannot be measured. And again, that's because I spent 3 years training people across the state of Victoria, organisations, on how to evaluate. But you'd be looking at short and medium term. You'd be expecting long-term change, but that's well outside the parameters of the grant time frame. And so don't expect them to take a leap of faith in you. You've got to tell them how you're going to prove to them that you have made a difference. So the seventh tip here, and this is the beauty. This is something I want to get again to give people, and what you have to do is just email me, tell me that you've watched this presentation. But every funder has their own criteria questions, yet most are asking the same things. Remember at the beginning when I said that somebody asked me what did I think about this funder, what experience I had, and I went, because I've worked across a whole range of funders. That's because there is a sort of a formula. That's the best way to put it, a formula. So, if they have their own criteria questions, what are they asking, and how does that help you? As I said, they ask them in so many different ways, but they're all asking for the same information one way or another. I can also say to you that I've already given you what they're looking for in those 7 tips. So, this is the secret sauce. Who, what, where, why, when, and how. Okay. If you're writing response for a funding application, the first thing after the administrator, of course, well, actually, the administrator is who's applying, where it's going to take place, when it's going to take place. All that information is actually in the administrator. Then you start with what. what are you going to do? So you'll have the title, make it as snazzy as possible, and then you'll be asked for a summary. It could be 50 words, it could be 150 words, but that's a 50. It's really about what the project is about. And then you'll be probably, it's how they do this, they'll be asked questions like, why? You know, why are you doing this? And this is all about that question about demonstrating the need. Mentioned that was one of those 7 criteria. They'll be asking, you know, who is it targeted to? Who's going to be involved in this? Who are your partners if you've got partners, etc. They'll be asking where, you know, where's it going to take place? When? That's your program plan. And how? How are you going to manage it? How are you going to do it? Again, your project plan. What we've put together is a simple document with who, what, where, why, when, and how, with some of those key questions that you would be answering that could be phrased in different ways. Now, the beauty of this document is if you have got a grant idea but you haven't found a funder yet, but you don't want to lose it because it's fantastic and you've got the potential and you've figured out why it's needed and you've got some evidence, then it's just a simple template, but you can actually fill it out, put it in your drawer and bring it out as soon as you know there's something available. So, you know, just for listening this far, all I say to you is at the back of this presentation, there is our contact information. I'll say to you, just email us and we will send this out to you. But what we've got is support@thecommunityentrepreneur.com, if you can remember that. Otherwise, go to the slides. So far we've covered what a grant is, where to start looking, the 7 tips for getting funded, and the secret sauce, which is basically a composite of those 7 tips. So what's the next step? You can go away and you can check a grant for yourself. I've given you the tools to do that. As I said, you could look at your council, then look at your state, look at your federal government, go somewhere like Grant Guru, look up somebody, some of those specific sector grants. As I said, just download, just go to get that grant, and there's a where to find grants in Australia. Download that document, and that gives you the links. You can start writing your grant application, and I've given you some, you know, sound advice on how to go about it and to think about that. You are it's not just about what you want to do. You're talking about how what you want to do fits in what they want to achieve, the funder wants to achieve, and keep focusing on that, not wander off, because otherwise you're not really answering the question. But you may be looking for more practice or guidance. There's nothing to stop you doing those first 2 steps, and you're probably, you know, great. But if you're new to this and you're not sure, we've got a 297 6-pack Get That Grant Online training program, and what we're looking at is presenting the program via live webinars over 6 weeks, because I just want to go back in that. The resources are there, but I just want to be able to add that new nuance, that new stuff that I probably have developed inside the original. So I want to do it with you. So if you're interested, probably, as I said today, it could be probably starting in about 10 days time. Today is the end of July, but you know, if it's something that you're interested in, then go to Get That Grant and follow the links, or contact us directly at support@thecommunityentrepreneur, and we can get you started on this program. It's got checklists, it's got templates, it's got manuals. A lot of blood, sweat, tears and love went into this in the first place, and we give it, this is our program. And there's more. So if you're thinking of applying for a few grants and want more depth, and as I mentioned earlier, I've got project management training program, I've got an evaluation program, I've worked in evaluation training people. We've got a 6-month mentoring program that will also I work through that whole process with you over 6 months, as well as the 6 weeks. And also, if you've got grants that you're preparing, I will work with you to critique them, advise them, critique, etc. So, look, as I said, there's never a 100% guarantee, but your chances are improved by working with somebody who can give you a different perspective. That's good. Um, as I said, we'll also focus on project management and impact evaluation. And that's good if you're thinking about doing this seriously as a grant writer, or if you're looking at bigger grants over time. So again, we need to have a conversation here. So there's a link there, bit.ly/TCE booking, to community entrepreneur booking. So, please feel free to contact me that way, and we can have a conversation. And I'll say, look, thank you for your time. If you've got any questions of the services we provide, including a dedicated grant writing done with you service, I don't do it for, I need the client to get engaged. I've got a small number of clients that I work with on a regular basis, so I get to know more of who they are, their structure, etc. But grant writing, project management, as I said, we go out there, we do consultancy, we do work with partnerships. We've got marketing expertise, strategic planning. We're just about to launch a whole new strategic planning product, which is exciting stuff. So, if there's anything that you want that's of interest to you, then please, don't hesitate. We just want to hear from you. So let's have a conversation. You can either contact me on 039 5889 or through email support@thecommunityentrepreneur.com, or just schedule a call, bit.ly/TCE booking. And finally, you can change the world. Thank you for listening today.